Hey guys, the Bladeguard Veterans are one of few good melee units generic marines have access to, so in this video we'll take a look at 3 powerful combos with them that you can use to enhance your list. So without further ado, let's dive right in. The first one I've already talked about in one of my previous videos, and it's a very fun one. I call it the Bladeguard Party Bus, and you will now understand why. You essentially want to try to get maximum efficiency out of the transport capacity of the Land Raider Redeemer, and by that I mean squeeze as many 3-wound marines as possible into this chassis. Do that, you take 2 squads of 6 Bladeguard Veterans and you attach a character to each of them. You can probably skip that step if you really wanted to save up on points. That depends entirely on which detachment you're running. The most important for Bladeguard is to have some sort of +1 to wound the lethal hits modifier so that their strength 5 is not as abysmal. In most cases you would want to run a character with them, and the easiest choice for that is a chaplain for +1 to wound, which solves their biggest problem. But you can also go for the Justiciar for fights first, you can go for the captain to perhaps access the battle tactics stratagem that gives you +1 to wound, or a lieutenant for the lethal hits and fall back and charge and shoot. In any case, as long as you have some sort of wounding help, it should work fine. Then you essentially stuff those 14 marines with 40mm bases, and that's just funny to imagine how much area that would cover on the tabletop and how much area the Land Raider covers. And they ride into the sunset, sipping on margaritas and gloriously purging the heretics and the Xenos. I'm pretty sure that this is, in terms of like wound per seat, per size, is the most dense configuration you can have your Land Raider in. It's a whopping 44 wounds of toughness 4 and 4+ invulnerable save. That's crazy. Considering that you get the character support, making the Bladeguard pretty efficient, obviously depending on your choice, plus you solve their mobility problem by moving them in a Land Raider, and also they can split into 2 different directions and go purging the center, one into the left flank and one to the right flank. Be careful with positioning this thing, because if you really run this combo, it's like 700 points, so it's one third of your army. It is a doozy to try to deal with. However, be careful, because if you don't have fallback and charge capability, so if you're running them in Gladius, you pretty much have all the tools available. But if you're running something like Firestorm, for example, you might need to be careful there, because you don't have so many available tools for them in the movement, and just getting that 700 point brick stuck somewhere where you don't want them to be may be a big problem for your army. Believe me, just seeing all that disembark from the Land Raider and looking at your opponent's face at that moment when they know that retribution has come for them, it will be priceless. As always, I want to remind you about my Patreon 40K coaching service. If you're looking for help building your competitive rosters, preparing you for tournaments, or have any questions about your collection in general, check out the links for my Patreon in the description. Thank you. Next is a more conventional combo, which is a Bladeguard Veteran plus a melee character. And I'm not specifying anything here. We're going to take a look at a couple here, which are great. But just the fact that the Bladeguard are only 30 points each for 3 wounds and 4+ invulnerable save marine gives you quite a lot of real estate in terms of points, so you can have your army, whichever that is, and whichever combos you go for there, and also this unit of 250-ish points with a character that will make them a very useful tool in mid/late game. You already need to think about where they go, because they will essentially occupy a certain area on the map that has a problem, and they will be able to deal with it pretty efficiently if you choose the character wisely. Good option for such a character, for example, is Andras Takacs we have here. So he gives them full rerolls to wound, which solves their problem of wounding partially, but I still want you to run them only in either Firestorm, where you have +1 to wound, or Gladius. So you can, when necessary, turn on that +1 to wound or lance and get them to wound something on 5s or 4s, and then reroll all wound rolls. And he also halves the enemy OC within engagement range, so if they are stuck in combat with someone, it will be easier for you to flip the objective, because if that something is, say, a battle line unit, then they will come back to your OC1 level, and then everything will be dependent on how good you are at cleaving through their squad, which that unit will be pretty good at that. Obviously, this melee character, in this case Andras Takacs, fights really well in combat, and almost all captains do. His case, it's 5 attacks, strength 10, AP 2, damage 3, weirdly with no devastating wounds, even though it's a Thunderhammer. You also would get reroll 1s to hit from the Bladeguard, so you have that backwards sort of buffing going on. Considering that most captains hit on 2s, including the Andras, he will be hitting on 2s, reroll on 1s without any oath help. And it plays again into that idea of this unit being more of a standalone kind of piece, that you are not really trying to run with the rest of your army and they operate alone. An alternative to running them in a detachment where you have access to +1 to wound is running them with a lieutenant. So you would get the lethal hits, which will help with high toughness threats and pretty much any other threat as well. Not as good as +1 to wound, but pretty close to that. In addition to that, a lieutenant also gives them fallback and shoot, fallback and charge capabilities, again aiding them with that role of a mid/late game tool that needs to go to different directions and solve problems for you that your other assets were not able to solve. Lieutenant is also, in my opinion, a pretty efficient investment because yes, you are paying 65 points for 4 wounds of 4+ invulnerable save, toughness 4, and 5 attacks, where you would get for 60 points 6 wounds and 8 attacks from the normal guys. However, the fallback and charge capability and also lethal hits, if you math it out, it will come to, I am pretty sure, Lieutenant being more efficient than just extra 2 guys, especially against higher toughness threats. Plus, he also hits on 2s instead of hitting on 3s with a Bladeguard, so 5 attacks hitting on 2s with lethal hits against 8 attacks hitting on 3s without lethal hits. Yeah, I think math is pretty close there. As an alternative to Andras, we have a number of options. You can just run them with a normal captain as well, which that is not a bad idea, really. You can choose another named character if you're running this chapter, so we can run Corsair Khan if you are playing White Scars, and he gives them Lance and Assault. Assault is not that crazy on them, however, just being able to shoot a couple of pistol shots. Moreover, what I really like about the Assault is the fact that you can advance and then do an action, which again aids them with this sort of universal, helpful unit kind of role. And they will also be able to throw a grenade after advancing and shooting pistols, so that is also very useful. In my experience, these units are often in a situation where they have, say, a lone up character and a couple of wounds left right close to them, and you don't want to throw more than just 1 CP to finish off that character, so having that grenade in your back pocket is very useful, and being able to use that after advancing is also useful as well. Obviously, you will want to run the squad here in either the Stormlands, but that's a very niche application because Stormlands is really not a great detachment for infantry. It's more of a mounted things. That's why we like Space Wolves there. I imagine this White Scars configuration more as a Gladius list, and then you can advance and charge, obviously, as I said, and also advance and shoot simultaneously, because one of the things that are very annoying when you are using the Assault Doctrine is the fact that you cannot use your small arms fire. Even though it's not that important, it's still cool. It would have been cool to be able to advance and shoot as well. But I digress. Another option we have is Ragnar Blackmane. He's a very cool character, and he's great in Gladius if you're running Space Wolves Gladius. Then he would provide a constant advance and charge to this squad of Bladeguard, and then if you run him plus a lieutenant plus 6 guys, it's a very nasty brick that does not cost that much. It's not a cheap unit by any means, but it doesn't cost restrictively a lot. The last one, which is probably my favorite one, the Bladeguard plus Marneus Calgar. Marneus is such a cool dude that he makes everything he touches, or in this case everything he leads, just better. If you want something more than company heroes but less than the aggressors, I'm pretty sure the Bladeguard are the sweet spot. It's a 40 points difference compared to aggressors, and also the Bladeguard have a different kind of survivability with the 4+ invulnerable save. They will be better against high AP threats than the aggressors are. Marneus just needs a lot of ablative wounds, to be honest, so it doesn't really matter what you attach to him as long as this something is relatively durable and fights reasonably well. So it can utilize the advance and shoot and charge he provides, and also fall back and shoot and charge he provides. And also Marneus' unit will be able to throw a grenade, as we discussed before, and Marneus will reroll hit rolls of 1, so he'll be even less reliant on oath. He doesn't really need it. I have a bunch of options for running this unit, like you can run them in Gladius. Thanks to another chapter, you can get +1 to wound that the Bladeguard really need, and also Marneus would love that for his twin-linked fists. Plus fight on death is pretty nasty on this unit as well. It's quite an expensive one, so any Bladeguard that fights on death is going to do quite a lot of damage, especially if it's something like a fragile Eldar character that charged them. Also run that in the Iron Storm because you don't need extra mobility. The mobility is inbuilt into Marneus, and the slower tank kind of list likes to have a more mobile infantry unit that can go through walls and reach targets relatively quickly, whilst being still relatively durable. And also the reroll will be helpful. Of course, in the Vanguard, you can have the whole shebang of Apothecary for lethal hits, and then the Blade Driven Deep and making the Bladeguard Strength 5 swords more dangerous because of the lethal hits, and then having that 8-man unit right in the midst of your opponent advancing and charging and being glorious. We'll know how awesome Marneus is in the Vanguard, so there's no surprise here. And lastly, of course, we can run them in the Firestorm because you still can get +1 to wound there, and as we discussed before, that's essentially the main requirement for this unit to be efficient. Of course, we would love to have extra mobility as well, like in the Vanguard and Gladius, the best options for that. However, in Firestorm and Ironstorm, it still works great. Let me know if you use Bladeguard Vets in your list. I love them, I love these models, and I'm always looking for more opportunities to use them in my armies. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.